Aaron Rodgers clarifies his future, and the only thing that's clear is that things are very unclear. Let's break down the latest Aaron Rodgers developments today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, November 27th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today, we have our weekly mailbag show. Each Wednesday, we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. Thanks so much to everybody who sent in questions. Could not do a mailbag without you. Let's begin our first question. John, what do you make of Aaron Rodgers' comments yesterday on the Pat McAfee show? And yes, in the Aaron Rodgers era, the Pat McAfee show is where Jets fans get their information. And the biggest development that came out of Rodgers' weekly segment on McAfee yesterday is that he addressed a report from The Athletic last week that he wants to leave the Jets, that he wants to play somewhere else in 2025. And I feel like we got no clarity on what Aaron Rodgers wants to do after his attempts to clarify things. And I think that I've noticed a trend in many Aaron Rodgers interviews that he's done, especially on the McAfee show, where he gives you the idea he's refuting a report without actually refuting the report. I think that's kind of what happened yesterday on his appearance, because again, the Athletic report is that he wants to play somewhere else in 2025. And he denied that, but then he didn't really give us any clarity on his future. Now, I guess technically he denied that he definitely wants to go somewhere else in 2025 and continue playing for a team that's not the Jets. But he did not guarantee anybody he's coming back for 2025. And I think much of this is common sense. If you look at the way the season's gone, there's very little reason to expect Aaron Rodgers to return in 2025. There's very little reason to expect Aaron Rodgers to want to return here in 2025. And frankly, there's very little reason to expect the Jets to want him to return here in 2025. But he made a comment that's we'll see what happens. The situation with Jeff Ulbrich will determine things. The situation with the general manager will determine things. It's a two-way street. He may not want to come back, but the Jets also may not want to come back. They may not want him to come back. The one thing that I thought was very notable was he said, "I haven't decided whether I want to play next year." And the reason that's notable is not that it's a big shock. He's been giving you comments along the way that, I definitely want to come back. And I've said this whole time that, when you're 40 years old, it's always a year-to-year thing. But what's notable is that for the first time, he acknowledged that he's not sure what he wants to do. As recently as 2 weeks ago, he told us that his plan was to return for the 2025 season. And I didn't really believe him at the time, but I think it is notable that he at least publicly acknowledged the possibility that he may be finished after the season. And based on the way the season has gone, I think that that's pretty obvious. I think it's pretty logical. I don't really see the rationale for the Jets wanting him back. I don't really see the rationale for him wanting to continue his career at this point. This is just a situation that's worked out for nobody, aside from maybe Green Bay, who, was able to use the spot Rodgers created to put Jordan Love into the lineup. But it has not worked for the Jets, and it has not worked for Rodgers. And I think logically speaking, the most likely scenario would be for Rodgers to not return in 2025. Next question is from Chris. John, can you explain the cap situation with and without Rodgers next year? I understand there's a big dead money charge if they cut him, but how does that change if they keep him? I'm guessing they would keep paying him and still have dead money charge at the end of 2025, but maybe you could clear this up. Okay, so I'm going to work under the premise here that the two options are Rodgers returning next year and retiring after 2025, or Rodgers just retiring after this year. So if he retires after this year, the Jets have to pay $49 million in dead money. So it's a $49 million dead money hit. And the reason for that is that the Jets have paid Rodgers $75 million over the last 2 years. And only $26 million of that's been charged against the cap. So the rest of that becomes dead money once the player leaves. All the dollars you paid a player that haven't yet counted against your cap become dead money. Now the Jets can do some accounting here. They can split that hit over the course of 2 seasons. So if Rodgers files his retirement paperwork after June 1st, that $49 million can be split. I think it's $14 million in 2025 and $35 million in 2026. But either way, the Jets are paying Rodgers $49 million against the cap, and that's dead money. If Rodgers returns next year, he only counts $23 million against the cap. The catch is, though, after he retires, after 2025, the Jets get a dead money charge of $63 million because we're adding to the amount he's being paid. So he's obviously much more expensive. Obviously, over the long run, it's much more expensive if he stays and plays another season. And that's a consideration the Jets and he both have to make, especially the Jets, because I don't know the Jets want to be hit with a $63 million dead money charge after next season. I think, $49 million is unattractive enough, but I don't think you want to go much beyond that. Next question is from Danny. Hearing a lot of get rid of Rodgers vibes. Who else could they start in 2025? Why not run it back with him on a prayer one more time, provided he gets out of general managing and just plays quarterback? I feel like this is a better option than starting Taylor, going 7-10, and missing out on a top pick in 2026. If he's awful, then bench him and roll with Travis and position yourself for a top pick in 2026. If we cut Rodgers loose, he will sign elsewhere like Minnesota and light it up. I don't know what more we need to see to convince people that Rodgers just cannot play at a high level anymore. I mean, how many impressive plays has he made over the last month or two with the Jets? He's 40 years old. He's an all-time great quarterback. He's going to the Hall of Fame on the first ballot. His legacy is secure in this league, but he cannot do it at a high level anymore. He doesn't want to throw the ball down the field. I don't know if you ever watched Pittsburgh the last year or two of Ben Roethlisberger, but this is kind of what it reminds me of, where he just doesn't. He just hesitant to take a hit, and I understand why he's hesitant to take a hit, because it just feels like his body can't hold up. He's gone from a guy who in week 1, week 2, week 3, even if he wasn't playing at like an MVP level, even if he wasn't playing spectacular football, was a guy who looked like a credible quarterback. He's gotten worse as the season's gone on, and I think that's just the aging curve. I think it's just the hits add up over the course of the season. So, I mean, I don't see the upside here. And I just mentioned that, you're taking Rodgers. If he comes back next year and plays one more year and then retires, well, then you're going to get a $63 million dead money bill in 2026. And 2025 is probably a lost season anyway. I understand the point about who else is going to play quarterback, because frankly, there are no good options. If you look at the list, I mean, who are you going to get? Justin Fields, Daniel Jones. It's a very uninspiring list. Unfortunately, though, Aaron Rodgers is a pretty uninspiring option himself at this point. And if his name wasn't Aaron Rodgers, I don't think people would be very excited at the idea of him coming back. I don't think anybody would really buy into the idea of him coming back. And I think almost all of this is just based on past performance. It's based on name recognition. It's not based on the quarterback he is right now. I mean, even if we go beyond the finances, even if we go beyond the idea that he's just going to be a player, he's not going to be the GM. I mean, I don't think for a second there's a scenario where Rodgers will return and be fine having no say over personnel. You're telling me Rodgers is going to come back and then not demand Devontae Adams be brought back or Alan Lazard? I find that tough to believe at this point. You're telling me Rodgers is going to come back and just be fine being a bridge quarterback for a bad team his last season? I don't know that I believe that. But the bigger issue, the most compelling issue, is that I just don't think he can play at a top level anymore. And I'm not convinced that Aaron Rodgers is better than the guys I listed. Is he better than Daniel Jones right now? Is he better than Justin Fields right now? I don't know that the answer to that is yes. I know that's a crazy thing to say, but he's 40 years old, and he's just going to be a year older. There's going to be a year of additional deterioration. So I don't see the argument for bringing him back. I think that it's a very tough case to make that Aaron Rodgers should return to this football team in 2025. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll continue looking to the future, but we'll leave the field. We'll look at the general manager search. Should there be some skepticism that the Jets brought back a familiar face based on the way his tenure ended with the team? I have some thoughts on that, and we'll give them to you as we continue here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot up to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks because you can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions that lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. And Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't? Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDONNFL, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by Skylight Frame. Want to celebrate with and stay connected to people who are far away? Are you missing someone this holiday season and want them to be part of your festivities from afar? Do your loved ones live far away but wish they could be close to you? Well, we've got the perfect gift for you. Skylight Frame is the touch-tone screen photo frame your whole family will love. Upload thousands of photos with your phone and watch them appear in seconds. It's so easy to use. Setup takes less than 60 seconds. There's seamless sharing. You can invite family and friends to easily share photos via the free Skylight mobile app or email. No account or subscription required. The touch screen is a game changer. Swipe through photos, tap to see photos sent, tap the heart button to say thank you to the sender. And now, as a special limited time offer for our listeners, get $20 off your purchase of a Skylight frame when you go to skylightframe.com/NFL. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME.com/NFL. Get $20 off your purchase now at skylightframe.com/NFL. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you every day, as this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question. John, I feel like I'm going crazy. The Jets brought back the general manager they fired 12 years ago to run their search for a new general manager. How can they do this? Yeah, that's not, I mean, that's not an unreasonable thought. Only the Jets, I guess, could bring back a guy they fired, a guy who, set them on this path. You have to remember that the 14-year playoff drought, which is showing no end in sight, began on Mike Tannenbaum's watch, where he made a lot of really short-sighted moves after the team lost the AFC Championship game in 2010, made a lot of bad bets, Plaxico Burress, of course, the famous Tim Tebow trade. Lots of very suspect decisions by Tannenbaum. Then went to Miami and had a pretty unsuccessful 4-year tenure with the Miami Dolphins. It's not an unreasonable way to feel. I think it's fair to ask, what has Mike Tannenbaum done in the NFL of late that he should be running a general manager search? And the report that came out last night is that it sounds like Tannenbaum is going to be the guy in charge here. Although Rick Spielman, the former Vikings GM, will be a part of this, there was an indication in a report that Tannenbaum's really going to be the point person. I guess here's the way I look at it. The Jets were going to have to bring in somebody to help the Johnson brothers with this search, because they just have no idea how to do it. And I'm not saying that to be critical. I say a lot about the Johnson brothers to be critical. I guess maybe this is a bit critical, but it's just also a fact. This is not a criticism. It's a fact. Maybe it's both. Johnson brothers have no idea how to run a GM search. And that's not good for them, because they've been in the league. We're going on 25 years. They've been running this team, and they still, after all these searches, need help. So I think it's good that they didn't try and do this on their own, because they didn't really know anybody. I think the other thing that's positive is that while everything you said was true about Tannenbaum, while it's accurate to say that his tenure did not end well with the Jets, and while it's accurate to say that there are a lot of bad things he's done running teams, he does understand the inner workings. He understands the internal politics of this team, and he was pretty good at getting his way, working around the dysfunction, if you will, to get his way while he was here. And that's better than in some ways, that's almost better than bringing in somebody from a normal organization who is used to regular processes. It's good to have somebody who's familiar with the craziness around the Jets, because he at least he understands where some of the blind spots are. He understands where some of the points of conflict are. So I feel like in some ways bringing in a guy who's got experience with the Johnsons is a plus. But the proof will be in the pudding. Let's see who he gets. Is he just going to bring in an old friend who's not really qualified for the job? My question, and this is, I'm just throwing this out there. I threw it out there yesterday. Is Tannenbaum going to run the search, look for the best candidate, and then report that I'm the best candidate? Is that his way to get back in? I said that somewhat jokingly, but we'll see. I don't know. And of course, the big question, because these Tannenbaum and Spielman were also hired for the coaching search. There's a former Jets coach who worked with Tannenbaum who was really pushing to get back in, Rex Ryan. Are they going to take a Rex Ryan candidacy seriously? I think that would be a big mistake for the New York Jets. We don't know the answers to these questions. Look, it's also, one of the things I mentioned yesterday is that just being a GM doesn't mean that you're going to be good at hiring GMs. There's a difference between being able to do the job well and hire for the job well. But the reverse is also true. Tannenbaum made a lot of mistakes at GM, but I don't know, maybe he's good at finding one. Maybe he and Spielman are tapped in well enough across the league that they can find somebody, and maybe they can talk the guy into working for Woody Johnson. I mean, I guess that's the hope. When you have people who haven't really done this job before, it's really difficult to say with any conviction. But I think those are the pros and cons. They're obviously, when you bring in a guy you fired 12 years ago who did not do a very good job with your team, it's going to lead to questions. But do I think all is lost? I'm willing to wait and see how good of a job Tannenbaum does. Next question. Is it time to bench Aaron Rodgers and start Tyrod Taylor? Taylor would be a cheaper bridge quarterback, and if good enough, would reduce the pressure to overdraft another quarterback who the Jets would no doubt destroy. It would be interesting to see if he would be prepared to throw it down the field, and he certainly could move better. Now, that question is from Peter in the UK. What I would say is that I think if the current quarterback's name was not Aaron Rodgers, and we were just basing it on his performance, he probably would be benched. At 3-8, is benching Aaron Rodgers really going to have that big of an impact? I would guess not. I mean, can Tyrod Taylor play at a slightly better level than Aaron Rodgers? Perhaps, but there's also a chance he doesn't. I remember when the Jets fired Robert Saleh, a lot of people said, well, there's no way Jeff Ulbrich could be worse. And I think by most accounts, Jeff Ulbrich has been worse. Not his fault. He was thrown into an impossible situation, but the Jets clearly downgraded the head coaching position. And, I think there's a tendency to want to do something when things aren't working. And I understand that. And I also understand how frustrating this whole Rodgers saga has been. I share your frustration in that. But, is Tyrod Taylor really going to fix what's wrong with this team? I would say probably not. Tyrod Taylor was a guy who, even in his prime, was a game manager. And he relied a lot on his mobility back in his prime. Those 3 years when he was the starting quarterback in Buffalo, he took the Bills to the playoffs in one of those 3 years. But at 35 years old, I mean, yeah, he could probably move better than Rodgers right now, but I don't think he's going to be vintage Tyrod Taylor. I don't think he's going to be a guy who really adds a whole lot as far as his legs go, because if you look at his recent production, he hasn't been as dynamic with his legs as he was during his days with the Buffalo Bills. I would anticipate that Rodgers is going to be shut down sooner rather than later, because obviously he's not healthy. So I don't know if the Jets are waiting for the 9th loss to do that. I don't know if they're waiting to be officially eliminated from the playoffs. I don't think there's going to be an outright benching of Rodgers. And, at some point you're kind of just rearranging deck chairs, right? I mean, at 3-8, what's 35-year-old Tyrod Taylor really going to get you by putting him in there? It's not like this is Jordan Travis, where, you're trying to get a young guy experience. This is just putting in another veteran who's probably not going to be able to succeed in this situation. I understand if you're just tired of seeing Rodgers. I mean, I get to points in games where I'm like, on my website, I'm typing in the comments, bench him. I can't watch him anymore. I understand things getting to that point of frustration, but in reality, I don't think it makes a big difference. I mean, I don't think Tyrod Taylor can play at a super high level right now. I mean, he's a guy who's in his mid-30s, and hasn't been a starting quarterback in a really long time. Maybe he can give you a good game. Maybe he can play at a slightly better level than Rodgers, but I don't think he's really going to give you a whole lot. And I don't think ultimately will make a big difference in how the team performs. Now, you're on the Locked On Jets podcast. It's been a dismal season for this team. Can we find somebody who's the MVP of this team? I have some thoughts on that as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Jets hosting the Seattle Seahawks this Sunday on Thanksgiving weekend. At MetLife Stadium, the Seahawks are 1.5-point road favorites with old friend Geno Smith at quarterback. If you like that action, again, FanDuel's the place to go. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday. We're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question, John, who do you think who do you think the Jets team MVP should be this season? That is a really tough question. Unfortunately, with the Jets, this question is frequently very, very difficult to answer because there are very few players who have a good season. I feel like you'd almost have to go with Garrett Wilson by default because, I mean, who else could you go with? It's obviously not the quarterback. Breece Hall's been playing really well lately. Last 6 games or so, he's been playing really well, but he got off to a really slow start this season. I mean, I don't think you go any of the other receivers. You want to go offensive line? I mean, yeah, they've had a couple of offensive linemen who've had good seasons. And then the defensive side of the ball, I mean, who's really playing that well on the defense? Quinton Williams has come on lately, but again, he got off to a really slow start. Sauce Gardner's having an incredibly disappointing season. It's really tough to say. It's really tough to find anybody other than Garrett Wilson. I think Garrett Wilson's been the most consistent performer on the team. So I don't know where else you could go. I think it's got to be Garrett. If it's not Garrett, who else would it be? If you have some thoughts, let me know. But I can't really come up with many consistent performers other than Garrett Wilson. Next question, John. Who is the best owner of this group? Woody Johnson, James Dolan, Al Davis, Dave Tepper. Well, Al Davis by far. And that's one of the sad things, and this is not really Jets related. Al Davis is the former owner of the Raiders. Al Davis had a really bad last 10 to 15 years with the Raiders, and the game really passed him by. But Al Davis is one of the visionaries in football history. He actually started as a coach. A lot of modern passing concepts that we take for granted were brought into the league by Al Davis. Al Davis, as Raiders owner, really incredibly ahead of the curve, really innovative. Led the team to multiple Super Bowl wins. It's really, really sad that a lot of the generation of football fans only remembers the last chapter of his tenure with the Raiders, because he really was one of the most brilliant minds in the history of football. Taking him out of there, I think Dolan would be the answer, because Dolan eventually figured it out. The two things with Dolan, if we're going with I don't think you could put Al Davis in that group. So the question becomes James Dolan, Dave Tepper, or Woody Johnson. And the answer is James Dolan, because first of all, Dolan's figured it out right now with the Knicks. And I guess that's the hope right now. I mean, things with the Jets are so desperate that we're hoping Woody Johnson turns into James Dolan. I mean, that's the state of the Jets right now. But Dolan's kind of, I don't know whether he's just gotten older and lost the ability to fight, or whether he's actually figured out that, I should just leave things to my basketball people. But Dolan's the clear answer, not only because of what's happening with the Knicks, though, but it's always flown under the radar. But he's actually been a pretty good owner with the Rangers. He also owns the New York Rangers in the National Hockey League, and he's actually been pretty good with them. They've been consistently good during they've never won the cup during his tenure, but they've always had a very competitive team, and they've always made a lot of moves that made sense. They've been very stably run franchise. And that was always the irony, is that Dolan ran the Rangers the exact opposite way the way he ran the Knicks. And the Rangers were successful. And it felt like he never really picked up on that maybe I should run the Knicks more like I run the Rangers. And he finally picked up on it a couple of years ago. But yeah, I mean, the thing Woody Johnson used to have as a saving grace was that you always used to say, well, at least he's not James Dolan, or at least he's not Fred Wilpon. Well, Fred Wilpon's gone now. Steve Cohen owns the Mets, and Dolan's kind of figured it out. So there's no real point you can say in Woody Johnson's favor anymore. Woody Johnson is the worst owner in New York, and arguably the worst owner in the NFL. And our last question, John, which defensive line do you think was better? The Jets in 2023 with Bryce Huff, Quinton Williams, John Franklin Myers, Quinton Jefferson, Jermaine Johnson, or the Jets defensive line in 2015 with Sheldon Richardson, Leonard Williams, Damon Harrison, Muhammad Wilkerson, and Calvin Pace. I take the Jets line in 23 because I think it's a better pass rushing defensive line. The line in 15 had a lot of guys who were run stoppers. Snacks Harrison was a run stopper. Sheldon Richardson was primarily a run stopper. Wilkerson was the thing with Wilkerson is his Jets career ended in such an ugly way that people forget what a dynamic player he was. I mean, he was a guy who could line a ball over the line, had multiple 10-sack seasons, had multiple second team all pro berths. But of that group, he was really the one guy who was a great pass rusher. The rest of them really weren't. And Calvin Pace was really at the end of his career at that point. Whereas the Jets defensive line in 2023, Bryce Huff had 10 sacks. Quinnen Williams was dominant. And Quinnen Williams was a two-way player. Quinnen Williams could stop the run and get after the quarterback. I think the same was true of JFM, and the same was true of Jermaine Johnson. So I think better rounded defensive line, but also more talent off the edge. Those Rex Ryan Jets teams were really, they had a lot of ability with defensive tackle type guys. They had a lot of ability with the big interior defensive lineman type guys, but they weren't so good on the edge. And the plan with Rex Ryan near the ends always seemed to be, let's bring Calvin Pace back for one more year. Calvin Pace, Rex Ryan was still the coach. Calvin Pace still might be the starting outside linebacker for the Jets, because that's kind of the way they operate. Although I guess 2015 was Bowles' first year, so I guess even Todd Bowles got into the habit of bringing back Calvin Pace for another year. But yeah, I think I'd go with the Jets defensive line from last year, because I think better defensive end play and better pass rushing. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out. It helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. Please travel safe if you're on the road today or you're traveling through the air or by the rails. And we'll chat again tomorrow for our Thanksgiving show.